Hello and welcome to this edition of Africa Speaks. My name is Joy Doreen Bira on this 4th of April 2015. Well, today our show is basically going to be about countering terrorism in Kenya, Nigeria, as well as Africa as a whole. And we're asking the question, what should be done to counter terrorism in Kenya, Nigeria, and Africa as a whole? You can use the hashtag Africa Speaks or my Twitter handle at Joy Doreen Bira, and we'll be able to get your feedback. Now, let's start by taking a look at some of the stories making headlines across the continent. Hello and welcome to this edition, and of course it's Africa Speaks today, the 4th of April 2015. My name is Joy Doreen Bira, and like I said, today our major attention is on countering terrorism. And Garissa University, about 90 miles, the equivalent of 145 kilometers from Kenya's border with Somalia, on Thursday morning saw Al-Shabaab militants raid the university college, leaving 147 people dead. And joining us live from Garissa is KTN's Ian Wafula. Ian, if you can hear me, good afternoon, and bring us up to speed with what's happening on the ground right now.
Good afternoon, and thank you, Joy, for having me on Africa Speaks. Well, this afternoon we've just been the buses that had been donated by the Ministry of Devolution, transporting the students, those who had been rescued from the Garissa University attack scene. The students, most of them had been taken to the military barracks right after they were rescued. This is the first time they're leaving the barracks since Thursday, Joy, and we've seen them very happy leaving Garissa for Nairobi. And just as they were leaving, they kept chanting and shouting goodbye Garissa. You could tell that indeed this is a great news for them, having experienced their friends being murdered as they watched hours of gunshots and uncertainty and whether they will make it out alive, and for them to go home to be join their families rather, that is quite some relief. This is what we've been witnessing this afternoon. And remember, Joy, we were not able to interact with some of these hostages teams. They were taken into the barracks, and this is the first time we were seeing them. Some of them, most of them actually were still in some of their clothes which they had on Thursday. Some of them very bloody. They didn't have time to change. They lost their phones, so they've not been able to talk to their families. It was quite heartening seeing them in this kind of situations.
Right, Ian. What are the findings right now in regard to the attackers?
Well, we've hardly had any more information from the government in regards to those who died. The government putting the number at 4 terrorists rather. But then when you talk to some of the students and you ask them how many people they saw, how many people they counted, they ranged the number of the terrorists between 7 to 10. Scanty details still to that. We can't just assume by what we're saying, but given that they were in the school during the incident, we will also have to consider that it is true that it might be possible the number of the terrorists was above what the government might have, the government was putting them to be.
Thank you very much, Ian Wafula, for the update from Garissa. That is KTN's Ian Wafula bringing us up to speed on what's happening on the ground and also some of the measures that are being taken to ensure that at least those who survived the attack are safe and sound. And of course, all too often, we are reminded that terrorism continues to inflict pain and suffering on people all over the world. Now, let's take a look at some of the stories making headlines. Trevor Noah has been selected to become the next host of the Emmy and Peabody Award-winning The Daily Show. Noah joined The Daily Show in 2014 as a contributor. He made his U.S. television debut in 2012 on The Tonight Show with Jay Leno and has also appeared on The Late Show with David Letterman, becoming the first South African stand-up comedian to appear on either late-night show.
Guys come up to me, they're like, "Hey, ¿qué pasó? ¿Qué pasa con los celos?" Like, whoa. Yo, I don't speak Spanish, man. I'm actually South African. He's like, South African? Like, you were born there? So yeah, my whole life. Like, I don't know. You look like you grew up in the shade, man. 18 hours of flying and I still wasn't black.
Noah has hosted numerous television shows, including his own late-night talk show in his native country, Tonight with Trevor Noah. He was featured on the October 2014 cover of GQ South Africa and has been profiled in Rolling Stone, Newsweek and the Wall Street Journal and by CNN and NPR's Talk of the Nation, among others. He continues to tour all over the world and has performed in front of sold-out crowds at the Hammersmith Apollo in London and the Sydney Opera House in Australia. Former military ruler Muhammadu Buhari's decisive victory in Nigeria's election might lead one to suspect that voters chose him over incumbent President Goodluck Jonathan for the military expertise he will be able to bring to bear on the fight against Boko Haram extremists.
You can see everywhere you see people are celebrating, people are fantastic, people are selling whatever they have. We have bought cows, chicken, sheep. We are going to slaughter and start jubilating. We are very, very happy.
I'm happy because everybody is happy for now, and we have a peaceful election on Saturday and also on Sunday. I'm happy we have change for now. I'm Buhari's state.
And John Kagezi, the top Ugandan state prosecutor in the trial of 13 men accused of a deadly Al-Shabaab bomb attack, was shot dead in Kampala during the week. Kagezi was targeted on her way home by motorbike gunmen. The trial of the men accused of links to the 2010 Kampala suicide bombing, which killed 76 people, had her in the lead of the investigation and has now been suspended indefinitely. Last week, the U.S. Embassy in Uganda warned of a possible terrorist attack. Joan Kagezi, the senior principal state attorney, headed the Directorate of Public Prosecution's Anti-Terrorism and War Crimes Division. And there's been a lot of news about terror, and that story from Uganda of Joan Kagezi, who was murdered, she was one of the people who was investigating the 13 suspects who were alleged to have, been behind the 2010 attack in Uganda. And of course, that was after a terror alert had been issued by the U.S. Embassy in Uganda. Now, of course, hardly a week goes by without an act of terrorism taking place somewhere in the world, indiscriminately affecting innocent people who just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And countering this scourge is in the interest of all nations, and the issue has been on the agenda of the United Nations for decades. Now, on the 2nd of April this year, senior UN officials condemned terrorist attacks against the Kenyan University that is in Garissa. And of course, to discuss counterterrorism strategies, we have in studio with me Rear Admiral, or the equivalent in some countries of Major General, that is Harry Arogundade. Thank you so much for joining us. He is the chair for Forts and Shields International Limited. And we also have Rafael Obonyo, who is in studio with us, a young global diplomat and strategist with the United Nations. Thank you so much for joining us. It's such an honor having you both in studio.
Thank you.
I'll start with you, Rear Admiral. It's been like an entire phase of back-to-back attacks when it comes to terrorism. And of course, those people behind these terror attacks, we're having Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram on the African continent. What exactly do you make of these never-ending attacks?
First, you have to look at the origin of terrorism, what it is all about. Terrorists take advantage of what we call gaps in the society, which could be political, it could be religious, it could be perceived marginalization, right? And to clear any of these things takes time. If you go back to the IRA in the United Kingdom, it took so many years. Mao in China took so many years. Even Mao here in Kenya took so many years, you know. So it's not something that you can just do overnight. All right, but what the government should also do is to look at these gaps and see how they can close or even eradicate them.
Right. You've mentioned something very important, and I think that connects to the recent attack in Garissa County. You talked about terrorists taking advantage of marginalized areas. Do you think that these areas are not given attention by the governments in Africa?
Again, sometimes it's as a result of perception. But when somebody is poor and he cannot eat, it is very, very clear. So for somebody to think is marginalized, he has seen the other side. He has seen other people, right? If you look at the terrorists that we're coping with, especially in Kenya and in Nigeria, their causes, right? The reasons for them going to war, the reasons are absurd, right? I know the Shabbat something with Kenya is as a result of Kenya being provoked into going into Somalia in 2011, right? It was a provocation when they were kidnapping tourists from here, and it was affecting the economy and the security of the people. So Kenya had no choice. So now it beats me. Well, Shabab will come to say it's coming to retaliate for something that they caused in the first instance. The Nigerian one is equally worse. That Boko Haram says they don't want Western education. They use the TV, they are firing guns, right, made from Western education, and you say you don't want it.
Western education.
So most of these reasons are very absurd. That's why I say sometimes people perceive, right, but in reality, most of these reasons are not tenable.
Right. Let me come to you, Raphael. You know, ever since we've seen these attacks, I should say, just like Rear Admiral mentioned, that ever since Kenya went into Somalia, that was in October 2011, we've seen retaliatory attacks from Al-Shabaab. And one of the conditions that they've given is that Kenya must pull out of Somalia if we're even going to see any kind of peace. But then again, on this side of Kenya, we've said enough is enough. And that is what we keep saying, you know, enough is enough. And we've said that one too many times. What exactly do you think is the problem?
First, let me say that you know, terrorism is a very complex and ever mutating sort of a vice in our society, and it's a global problem. It affects the attack is done in one country, but it has ripple effects in many other countries. In the case of Kenya being in Somalia, we must realize that the breakdown in Somalia since the 90s has evolved into chaos that it's not just affecting Kenyans. Even if Kenya didn't move into Somalia, I think these attacks would still be there. And you'll remember that part of the reason why Somalia is as it is because in 1993, US removed its troops from being part of the UN mission that was operating in Somalia.
Right.
And from that point, then the situation degenerated into chaos. And Kenya was being attacked even before it moved into Somalia. And that's why they said, look, let's pursue these people all the way to Somalia. I do not think in my own assessment that by removing our troops from Somalia, Kenya is going to be any safer. In fact, if we allow, what we should do is we need sort of a double-pronged approach, where yes, we are pursuing the terrorists and we are engaging in war against terror, but we're also helping sort of failed states to stabilize, so that the monumental task of building Somalia into a stable state is what is going to secure Kenya, not necessarily removing its troops. And so the focus should not just be on pursuing Al-Shabaab and the terrorists, must also be towards stabilizing Somalia as a state.
Right. Rear Admiral, I would like to bring you in here a little bit, because what we are seeing is these terrorists are using sophisticated ways of attacking, certain areas around the African continent. And the most affected countries, of course, have been Nigeria and Kenya, as well as Uganda. But do you think that our armies have the right technology to fight back at the terrorists?
We do. I mean, I use, like when I first joined the military, which is over 40 years ago, terrorism wasn't part of our curriculum. But over the years, like, let me make Nigeria that I'm very, very much aware of, As an example, we have had help from, say, the United States, even sometimes Britain, to train our soldiers, our troops, more now on anti-terrorism aspects of warfare. So I think our soldiers are in a way capable of coping, but we will need the political will and the support of our political masters. Areas of weapon acquisition, logistics support, and the political strategy because fighting terrorism is not just weapons. You also have to solve the political aspects, like educating the people, discouraging people from being brainwashed, which is as a result of education again.
Right.
So it's not just the soldiers. I think that anti-terrorism activities are for everybody, not just soldiers.
Right. And well, you're watching Africa Speaks, and today we're asking what should be done to counter terrorism in Kenya, Nigeria, and Africa as a whole. And we're using the hashtag Africa Speaks, so be sure to use that on Twitter when you're giving your feedback. And when we return, we are going to be talking about terror alerts. Do we take these alerts really serious? And, when they're given by the United States or by the United Kingdom, what happens on this side? Do we leave it to the governments, or do we take personal initiative to remain vigilant? That is what we're going to be discussing after this break. Welcome back. You're watching Africa Speaks, and we're discussing countering terrorism. Our hashtag is Africa Speaks on Twitter, and I can already see a lot of feedback coming through to the hashtag, and also using my Twitter handle. And of course, would like to hear from you. What do you think should be done to counter terrorism on the African continent? Terrorism poses a real and serious threat to the security and safety of the alliance and its members. It's a global threat that knows no border, nationality, or religion. A challenge that the international community must tackle together. And counterterrorism focuses on improved threat awareness and preparedness, as well as developing adequate capabilities and enhancing engagement with partner countries and other international actors. And we know that it's not just about Al-Shabaab, it's not just about Boko Haram. We're also linking this to Al-Qaeda. And of course, from this you can see what has happened across the world with ISIL and everything else. Now, joining us from South Africa is Dorothy Ngila, who is an Afropolitan. Dorothy, from your take, what do you think should be done to counter terrorism?
I think that the African continent needs to be a little bit more internal looking. So there are all kinds of internal misstructures that we have in our continent that allow for these terrorism activities to thrive. So for example, we need to be asking ourselves questions around, is our military personnel adequately benefiting in terms of their salaries? Are they working in the right conditions of service? And asking those kinds of questions, for example, will be able to deal with issues of bribery and corruption that we see in our military. The second thing that we need to also be thinking of is, why are the youth in our continent really so much attracted to these terrorist organizations? Part of it is because we have a huge problem with youth employment. So there are all these comprehensive measures that we need to be taking internally first before we start thinking about external measures of countering terrorism in our African continent.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Dorothy. We do appreciate your view on countering terrorism. That's Dorothy Ngila, live from South Africa. And I'll just throw it back to us, my guests in studio. I'll start with Rear Admiral. From what she has said, she's looked at internal and external factors. And one of the internal factors is the issue of youth unemployment. Do you think that youth are being lured into joining terror forces as opposed to joining the military on the African continent?
It's a very common problem because the terrorists need something to attract the youth or their recruits, right? And for, as people say, the devil finds job for idle hands. So for a guy who is 18, 23, and he's not having anything doing, it even looks at some of these terrorists as heroes. And it's not just in Africa. We've heard of even cases where some Europeans, Americans were trying to cross to Syria or whatever to join through Turkey to join ISIL or ISIS. So it's a very significant fact that unemployment amongst youth and poverty are factors contributing to the growth of some of these terrorist organizations.
Right. Let's talk about the terror alerts that the United States of America and the United Kingdom have in the past always given to specific countries when they think that there's going to be a terror attack prior to that date. And I think we've seen the recent one that was given to Uganda. There was a terror alert there that was given last week. And also there's another one that was given by the United States on Kenya. And they also, signaled out which areas exactly they thought were going to be attacked. The same has happened in Nigeria. But do you think that our governments are listening to these alerts or are paying attention to them, or it's just something that they're giving a cold shoulder?
No, all governments do. But sometimes what I find very, I won't say annoying, but not easy to take is about this terror alerts that some of them make people panic unnecessarily. I believe every effort should be taken to minimize damages and casualties. But some of them are false in nature. And nothing ever happens, but a lot of people are panicked. People wanted to travel, will not come. It affects our economy.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So, as much as I think they are necessary, but I think they should be done with more certainty, They should be more certain about what they are saying first.
They should be more certain with them. I'll bring it over to you, Raphael. And, Dorothy as well, again, was talking about some of the internal factors. And she also mentioned corruption and bribery. And she did mention that some of these attacks or some of these terrorists were being funded by local politicians in these African countries. Do you believe that?
To a large extent, yes. One, because if you look at the terror attacks and people who are involved, first of all, they're very young people. I mean, some of the reports indicate they're between 18 and 25. And like Dorothy rightly puts it, a majority of young people in the continent are unemployed. 60% of jobless people in the continent now are young people. These are people who will fall to anything, that can help them sort of make a living, make a daily bread. So to that extent, they are vulnerable and they're manipulated by perhaps politicians who might want to achieve some sort of selfish interest. That is as far as a misuse of young people is concerned, and the question of youth unemployment. But there are also politicians who are benefiting directly from instability and conflict in the continent. I mean, we've seen it and General might be better poised to talk about that in West Africa, where politicians, cause destabilize, politics and the economy, so they can reap, because from that instability and from the conflict, they're able to take advantage. It's the same in Eastern Africa, and in the case of Somalia. I mean, we've heard of reports of how certain politicians or high-placed public officials or even members of the military are benefiting from trade in Somalia, and that tends to perpetuate.
And it's the same thing as well across the borders of Nigeria.
Certainly.
But what we are seeing are porous borders that we are having, and maybe in a way we have neglected those borders and made them very easy for anybody to just walk in and out. I would pose this question to Rear Admiral. Do you think that our borders are guarded well enough to cut out?
Not at all. And I can remember personally having made some observations to some who are concerned with, or saddled with responsibility of our borders. There's no excuse, right? But if you look at our historical background, like in Nigeria, I come from the western part of it. Across the border, Yorubas like me, right? But that notwithstanding, because if you go to a place like Germany or Austria, you also have such historical ties, but their borders are well manned. So that's why our historical relationships, our borders will need to be very properly manned, but they are not right now. They're very, very porous.
Right. I'll just take a few responses here from Twitter under the hashtag Africa Speaks, and we're having Globale Peter Njuguna, who is saying government should create employment opportunities to counter youth radicalization and jihadism, and Africa needs to invest in intelligence and to respond to attacks swiftly, beef up the REC numbers, that is Lubale Peter. And we're also having Kato Shakilo, who is saying those attacks can end if our leaders stop seeing those attacks as opportunities to make money through asking for money. And we're having another coming in from Kamau, who is saying Kenya should wash its hands of Somalia and Nigeria should find the source of Boko Haram's funding and cut it out. I would like to hear your final remarks as we wind up. I'll start with you, Rafael Obonyo.
I think we need to invest in more in preventive measures. We can't keep second guessing about terrorism, and we cannot be one step behind terrorists. I think we need to be better prepared and then invest more in preventive measures. And the second thing is we need to involve public in terms of, I know, for example, in the case of Kenya, the president has said part of the problem is we have inadequate police. I think what we need to do, we can't have one police per civilian. What we need to do is to also encourage the public to get involved in the war against terror. And so we need to put up structures that we are going to support community policing that is going to help the public to volunteer information on terrorism, terrorists and terror attacks to the police. But for us to do that, we need to inspire confidence amongst the public that our police force is professional, is responsive, is going to react and is going to take the right
inspire
action.
Confidence.
Yes.
Rear Admiral, what are your final remarks to this?
I'd just like to add that counterterrorism is everybody's responsibility. You cannot leave it to the military alone. You cannot leave it to government alone. Avenues must be created by government where people can easily communicate observations. The public needs to be educated that, look, if you make such observations, these are the people you can call. And then the government too must make sure that its military, its security organizations are well equipped to counter the acts of terrorists.
Right. Well, thank you so much for joining us in this edition of Africa Speaks. Unfortunately, we're out of time, and I wish the discussion would go on. But I'm sure in consecutive bulletins, we're going to be having the discussion on countering terrorism, as well as other discussions, of course. At 9 o'clock, you'll be joined by Yvonne Okwara and John Alanamo, of course, who will take this discussion to yet another level. My name is Joy Doreen Bira, and in studio with me have been Rear Admiral Harry Arogondede, who is retired, and he is the chair for Forts and Shields International Limited. And we also had Rafael Obonyo, who is a young global diplomat and, of course, strategist at the United Nations. Thank you both for joining us and for the great discussion that we've had this far. Also, thanks to Ian Wafula, who gave us an update from Garissa town, where the attack did happen. And, of course, as we wind up, we'd like to wind up with an Afro sound that is coming in from Darius Rocker, who did another rendition on war. If only we could stop war, we would live in a better world, I think. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. God bless.